You think you own these streets? Travis McDowell yelled, his boots pounding against the pavement, Confederate flag held high. Well, we're taking it back, every inch of it. His crew followed close behind, shouting, waving their banners, believing they had come to reclaim what was theirs. But what they didn't know was this. Portland wasn't a city that took kindly to hate. And before they could even blink, the streets had turned against them. This wasn't a protest. This was a setup. And they were about to find out exactly what happens when hate tries to march through Portland. The sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm golden glow across Portland's quiet streets. The familiar hum of the city buzzed through the air, people strolling along the waterfront, couples walking hand in hand, a musician playing a soft tune on the corner. This was Portland, a city known for its vibrant culture, its progressive values, and its dedication to love, acceptance, and community. The city was alive in its own peaceful rhythm, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. But then, it happened. The sound of engines roaring cut through the calm. 4 dark vans rumbled into the heart of the city, their tires screeching against the pavement as they turned onto 9th Street. The group inside was loud, confident, and brimming with arrogance. As the vans rolled to a stop, the doors flew open with force, and the men stepped out, one after another. They wore their pride like armor-leather jackets, heavy boots, and Confederate flags fluttering proudly from their backs. Travis McDowell, the leader of the group, was the first to step onto the sidewalk. He stood tall, his chest puffed out, his eyes scanning the city like a king taking his throne. He smirked, knowing they had come for one purpose, to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Portland doesn't know what's coming, he muttered under his breath, his voice filled with satisfaction. We're taking it back. Behind him, his crew followed, as if in a carefully rehearsed march. Each man moved with the same sense of power and control. They didn't see the city in front of them as a place to engage. They saw it as something to conquer. And in their eyes, there was no resistance. Portland was just another city to add to their list. They didn't realize they had walked into a city that didn't bow to hate. But to them, this was just another stop on their journey. They saw the murals on the walls, bold, colorful representations of civil rights leaders, activists, and heroes, and they scoffed. To them, it was just decoration. They didn't understand the meaning behind those faces, the history that Portland carried in its very bones. Look at this place, one of the men in the crew snorted. It's a joke. Think they can teach us about anything? Travis didn't answer. He was too focused on the street ahead of him. As he moved down the sidewalk, his boots echoed through the city, each step louder than the last. He could feel the eyes on him, people who stopped mid-conversation, eyes wide, unsure of what to make of the group's arrival. Some people glanced at the Confederate flags, some looked away, but none of them spoke. They were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Travis and his crew didn't care about their silence. They thought they owned the space. This was their city now. The more they walked, the more their confidence grew. The vans were parked behind them, engines still running, the sound of their presence mingling with the otherwise peaceful hum of Portland. They shouted insults, taunts mocking the people they passed, laughing at the murals, the shops, the businesses they didn't understand out in the distance. A group of Portlanders gathered outside a local coffee shop, chatting over iced drinks. They noticed the group, but didn't move. They didn't shout, didn't react. They just observed. Some sipped their drinks, others crossed their arms. No one looked afraid. It was as if they could already sense what was happening. Portland was a place of quiet resistance, and while it might not have been obvious to Travis and his men, the city had seen this all before. But for now, the group felt invincible. Their arrogance filled the streets. They thought their presence would be enough to make people cower. They didn't know yet, but the city was already working its way into their minds. We're going to take this place down, Travis said to his crew, the words heavy with certainty. He gestured to the street around him. This city's weak. It's just a bunch of people living in a fantasy. They'll know who's in charge soon. They reached a public square where a popular landmark stood a statue of one of Portland's civil rights pioneers. The statue was tall, standing proudly at the center of the square. To the residents of Portland, it wasn't just a statue. It was a symbol of the city's strength, its fight for justice, its unshakable resolve in the face of oppression. But to Travis and his crew, it was just another target. He stood in front of it, hands on his hips, eyeing it with disdain. "Let's make sure they know who runs this town," Travis said, grinning. One of the crew members pulled out a can of spray. Paint. The bright color against the dull stone was stark unnatural. A Confederate flag was hastily scrawled across the statue's base. The men clapped, laughing at what they thought was an act of defiance. But they didn't see the woman standing on the other side of the street, watching quietly. Her eyes were steady, not with fear, but with resolve. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any protest. She simply pulled out her phone and started recording. The rest of the crowd began to move, a few, heads turning, some raising their phones. The group didn't see it at first. They were too busy celebrating their destruction. But the cameras were already on them. Videos started to spread, quietly at first, but soon it became clear. Portland wasn't cowering. Portland was watching. Travis and his crew kept moving, unaware of the storm that was beginning to brew. They didn't know yet that this city, this seemingly peaceful place, was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. Portland didn't take kindly to hate. But for now, the group was too focused on their own arrogance to notice. The group had arrived believing they would take control. They believed their presence alone would make Portland bend to their will. But the truth was, they had walked into a place they didn't understand, a city full of pride, history, and an unwavering commitment to peace. And Portland wasn't going to let them forget that. As the group began to march deeper into Portland's heart, their brash confidence rippled through the streets like a wave crashing into a wall. Travis led the way, strutting along with that same cocky grin plastered on his face. Behind him, his crew mirrored his every move. Confederate flags fluttered from the van's windows, snapping like chains in the wind, and the sound of their boots striking the pavement echoed down the street, louder and more forceful with every step. They turned onto the waterfront, right where the heart of Portland's culture pulsed. The air was thick with the smell of fresh seafood, food trucks lining the streets offering their best dishes, and the distant hum of laughter as people wandered in and out of shops. But the group was determined not to blend in. They weren't here to be part of the scenery. They were here to make a statement. A few tourists and Portland locals stopped and stared, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. Some pulled out their phones, as they had seen on social media. Others just shook their heads, muttering quietly. What are they doing here? Travis, ever the showman, had made up his mind. This wasn't just about getting attention. It was about taking control, making sure the world knew they couldn't be pushed around anymore. They stopped in front of a beloved city landmark, the Willamette River Promenade, home to a large, prominently placed memorial of civil rights leaders. The faces of those who fought for equality and justice had been immortalized in bronze along the promenade, a lasting symbol of the city's progressive and inclusive values. But Travis didn't see a symbol of struggle and strength. He saw a target. Look at this, Travis sneered, pointing toward the memorial. The wind caught his Confederate flag again, making it snap in the air like a taunt. They think these people stand for something. They think they're heroes. A few of his men began laughing, nodding along, clearly emboldened by their leader's words. One of the younger members of the group, a fresh-faced man with a wild look in his eyes, pulled out a can of spray paint from his bag. The smell of the paint mixed with the fresh air as he unscrewed the cap, preparing for the first act of destruction. You think this means something to Portland? A young man said, his voice dripping with disdain. Let's see if we can make it mean something else. Before anyone could say anything, he was already stepping toward the monument. In a flash, he was slapping the can to the cold stone surface of the memorial, drawing thick, jagged lines across the etched faces of civil rights leaders. First, it was a simple swipe, an X over the face of a man whose name was already faded by time. Then another, and another. He wasn't just defacing history. He was trying to rewrite it. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Travis clapped him on the back, laughing along with the others, encouraging the vandalism. That's right. Show him who's in charge. The crew joined in, some of them waving flags, others making mocking gestures. One man grabbed a bottle of beer from his backpack, chugging it down before spitting it at the monument. They kept chanting their empty slogans, their voices rising in volume, convinced they were dominating the space. The spray paint hissed with each stroke, as if mocking the figures they were desecrating. None of them noticed the quiet murmur from the small crowd that had gathered. Some of the onlookers pulled out their phones, recording the destruction. Others simply stood in stunned silence, processing what was happening in real time. One woman, standing near a food truck, slowly lowered her basket of fries. She looked up, her eyes scanning the group, and then the defaced monument. She could see them, all the young people around her, all the tourists who had stopped in their tracks, eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Some people had already started to whisper, "Are they serious? Or what are they doing?" But there was no immediate resistance, no rallying cry. The city was still waking up to what was happening. Some residents had been caught off guard by the audacity of the group, unsure whether to step in or stay quiet. Yet, all the while, the tension in the air grew thicker, simmering beneath the surface. When Travis saw people pulling out their phones, he threw his head back and laughed. This is it. Let them record. Let them watch. We'll make sure they see what real power looks like. He gestured for the group to keep pushing forward. His mind was made up. This was the first step in taking back the city. And Portland? It would bend. It would have no choice. But as the crew continued their march, they didn't see what was quietly unfolding behind them. The same phones that had been pulled out to record the act of vandalism had already begun to send the footage. Far and wide. People from all corners of Portland were starting to take note. But what they didn't know, what Travis and his men didn't see, was how quickly the city would respond. At first, there was nothing. Silence. But slowly, like a tide rising from below, word started to spread. One by one, Portlanders began to show up. From the docks, from nearby bars, from the coffee shops and murals, from the corner stores and neighborhoods, Portland was quietly waking up to the fact that this was not a simple protest. This was something more insidious. But they had no plans of letting it spread. In the back of the group, the crowd now saw more people gathering, moving in a calm but deliberate manner. They didn't speak much. They didn't shout slogans. They just walked with purpose. The few remaining people who hadn't seen what was going on began to notice it too. A protester quietly passed by a small group of teens, whispering something under their breath. It wasn't just about defacing a statue or waving flags. No, this was different. This was personal. Travis, still leading the way, did not yet feel it. The power, the feeling of ownership over the streets. It hadn't quite hit him that it was slipping from his grasp, but the cracks were starting to show. The defiant chants were losing their strength. The laughter that had come so easily moments before now seemed faint, hollow, as the realization set in. Portland wasn't just a city you could control with threats and hate. And as the group continued, oblivious to the shifts happening around them, their actions began to echo louder than they intended. A few feet ahead, one of the men still holding his Confederate flag high suddenly stopped. His eyes locked onto a figure moving through the crowd. It was an older woman, standing tall, her face painted with defiance, her shoulders back like she had something to prove. She held no signs, no flags, just a steady gaze, unwavering and full of resolve. But her eyes were not the only ones that watched. She wasn't alone. A crowd made up of individuals from different walks of life, from the elderly to the young, from families to teenagers, was silently gathering at the edges. They weren't raising fists. They weren't shouting. They weren't even filming. They were just standing, watching. And as the group continued marching, the heavy realization began to settle in. They had walked into something bigger than themselves. Something they hadn't counted on. The phones buzzed faster. The footage moved through Portland faster than anyone could predict, from one corner to the next, spreading like wildfire. But it was no longer just the group's voices in the video. It was the city's pulse, the people who loved Portland, the ones who built it, who fought for it, who believed in its progressive spirit. As the group reached the next corner, one of them, nervous, eyes darting around, said, Maybe we should head back. Travis, still confident, waved him off. No, no, we're not leaving yet. We came here to make a statement. This is just the beginning. But with every step they took, the city was stepping closer to something else. They didn't know it yet, but they were walking directly into the heart of resistance, where power didn't come from flags or symbols. It came from something much more formidable: community, unity, and the willingness to stand against hate. And Portland? Portland wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. As the group continued their march, their sense of power seemed to grow with each step. The Confederate flags snapped loudly in the wind, their faces twisted in arrogance as they paraded down the streets of Portland, thinking they were invincible. What had begun as an act of provocation, the defacement of public monuments, the taunting of the city's peaceful residents, was quickly morphing into a show of dominance. Or so they thought. But what they didn't know was that, while they were making their presence felt with loud words and waving banners, Portland was responding in the background with something far more dangerous than shouting and confrontation strategy. Across the street, a tall, calm figure stood silently observing the scene. King Mello, a man whose presence commanded quiet respect, had been watching the group since their arrival. Unlike the others who had rushed to film and take action online, Mello didn't need to react hastily. He didn't believe in fighting fire. With fire, he believed in silence, in understanding the moment before acting. His eyes remained fixed on the group, taking in every detail. He didn't flinch at the sight of the Confederate flags or the crude slogans. They were nothing new. He had seen this kind of hatred before, and he knew exactly how to respond. Mello wasn't the kind of man who rushed to social media to make a statement. He wasn't concerned with how loud his voice could be on a screen. Instead, he believed in the quiet power of people, and the time for shouting was over. The time for action had come. As the group's march continued down the block, Mello slipped into the shadows, blending in with the crowd. He didn't need to make a speech. He didn't need to raise a fist or shout. He had already been doing the work for years, building a network of community leaders, allies, and activists who knew how to mobilize without drawing attention. He wasn't a man of social media. He was a man of offline power. Mello's phone buzzed once in his pocket, and he pulled it out, checking the message with a calm expression. It was from one of the community leaders he had been working with in the background. It's time. The streets are ours. Mello didn't need any further explanation. He knew what to do. As the group continued to parade through the streets, unaware of what was happening in the background, Mello made his way to a quiet barbershop just off the main street. Inside, the shop was filled with the hum of clippers and the low chatter of customers getting their haircuts. The barber, an older man who had lived in Portland for decades, looked up when Mello walked in. His face softened with recognition. "You see what's happening out there?" The barber asked quietly, his eyes flicking to the window. "I see it," Mello replied, his voice steady. "But we don't do it that way." "Not yet." The barber nodded, understanding exactly what Mello meant. There was no need for the flash of anger, no need for a big protest or an open confrontation. Mello's power lay in his ability to get things done without ever drawing attention to himself. His reputation in the community was built on quiet action, and it was that reputation that was now going to save Portland. "I need you to make a call," Mello said, his voice low. "Tell the others. We move now." The barber didn't hesitate. He pulled out his own phone, tapping a few quick messages, sending them off without a word. Mello didn't need to ask him to hurry. He knew the man had been doing this kind of work for years. His message would be passed along to the right people, the ones who knew exactly how to respond, quietly, efficiently, and without ever making a scene. Mello didn't waste any time. As the barber made his calls, Mello turned toward the back of the shop and stepped into a small office tucked away from the main space. Inside, the walls were lined with old photographs of the neighborhood, of the city's history, some faded with time, others as sharp and clear as the day they were taken. The room was small, but it was a reflection of the community's roots, strong, unyielding, and connected. Mello sat down at the desk and picked up the phone, dialing a number he had memorized years ago. The phone rang once, twice, before someone on the other end picked up. You know what's going down, Mello said calmly. I need you to get everyone in position. It's about to happen. There was a brief pause, then a voice responded. Understood. We're ready. Mello hung up, his expression unchanged. The pieces were falling into place, just as he had planned. While the group continued to broadcast their hate for the world to see, the people of Portland were already quietly preparing. No shouting, no protests. Just action. The city was starting to hum with the quiet movement of those who refused to let hate take hold. Mello could feel the shift in the air, the rising tension beneath the calm. The city was uniting in its own way, and soon the group would know exactly what it meant to challenge Portland's resilience. As Mello walked back out into the street, he was joined by others, people he had worked with for years, people who had supported his quiet resistance. They weren't marching with flags or screaming in the streets. They were simply moving to their positions. They were preparing for the next step in the city's defense. Mello's role was never to be the loudest. It was to be the one who saw the bigger picture, the one who understood the right moment to strike. And that moment was fast approaching. As the group continued to march, unaware that their time was running out, Mello knew one thing for sure. The community had already won. The city had mobilized. And they had done it quietly. The group had spent the better part of the afternoon walking through Portland, loud and boisterous, as they waved their flags high and shouted their chants at every passerby. The further they moved into the heart of the city, the more they felt the heat of Portland's progressive spirit, but they refused to back down. They believed the more aggressive they became, the more Portland would buckle. But they were wrong. The initial sense of power they felt as they paraded through the streets began to crumble as the day wore on. The once strong chants became strained, and their smiles so smug at the beginning started to waver. Each step they took forward felt heavier, as though the ground was pushing back against them. Travis McDowell, leading the charge, kept his chest puffed out, his boots stomping with pride, but his eyes darted around the crowd now gathering at the edges. What began as whispers became murmurs, and soon a small group began to form behind them, eyes locked on every movement. They weren't protesting. They weren't speaking out. They were simply watching. But it was enough to make Travis feel the sting of discomfort. He wasn't in control anymore. Who are these people? One of the crew muttered, glancing at the crowd of locals watching them from a distance. What's their problem? They're just trying to intimidate us. Travis replied, but his voice had lost some of its edge. He didn't know what was happening, why. All of a sudden, Portland wasn't caving. They'd expected resistance, sure, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of fight they knew how to win. With every block they walked, the tension grew. People weren't engaging in direct confrontation. They weren't screaming at the top of their lungs. No, they were doing something much more dangerous. They were silent. And that silence had a weight to it, a growing awareness that was slowly creeping into the group's bones. One of the crew members, a younger guy with a bandana tied around his head, stopped in his tracks and stared at a passerby who was recording them on her phone. The woman didn't seem afraid. She wasn't even speaking. She simply stood there, recording the entire procession. Her face was calm, neutral, like she'd seen this show before. What's wrong with her? The young guy said, trying to keep his voice steady. Doesn't she know who we are? Travis snapped back, his usual bravado returning, but it was forced. Ignore them. We're here to take what's ours. They'll bow down soon enough. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The crowd wasn't reacting the way they expected. Instead of shrinking away, they were gathering around them, forming an almost invisible barrier. They were quiet, but every gaze that followed them was full of something far more powerful than words. Judgment. As they moved down to a popular park, a few teens on bikes started riding in front of them. They didn't stop. They didn't yell. They didn't protest. They simply circled around the group, their movements synchronized and deliberate. It was like they were a part of the city itself, blending seamlessly into the environment, not making a scene, but making sure the group couldn't move freely. Stay focused, Travis barked, though his voice was losing some of its fire. We're not here to fight with kids. But it was too late. The message had already been sent. A few blocks ahead, they reached a busy corner. A group of locals was hanging out at a food truck, chatting and laughing, their faces warm and open. When they saw the group approach, the laughter halted for a moment. The smile on one woman's face faded as she glanced at the group of men approaching. Then, instead of glaring or shouting, she just stepped forward, calmly and deliberately. She walked past them without a word, but her eyes locked with Travis's for a brief second, and in that instant, he could feel something shift within him. She didn't need to speak. Her look steady, unflinching, was a challenge. The group continued to walk, but now there was an invisible weight pressing down on them. The more they moved forward, the more they realized that something was happening in the crowd. People were pulling out their phones, and it wasn't just for taking pictures. No, they were documenting every single step of the group's march. Videos were being shared in real time, not just locally, but globally. The quiet clicks of cameras, the subtle sounds of people typing on their phones or filling the air. It wasn't just a few angry protesters now. It was the city watching. The city recording. "I don't like this," one of the men in the crew muttered, his voice shaking. "Something's off." "Stop worrying," Travis snapped, but his confidence was starting to fade. "It's just a few people. We're not backing down." But even as he said it, he couldn't help but notice the way the crowd had shifted. People weren't reacting the way they should. Some had started to gather around them, but not in the way a protester would. No, they weren't shouting or trying to push them out. They were simply standing, quietly, with their phones raised, capturing everything. It was an eerie kind of silence that only grew louder the longer it went on. The flags that had once waved proudly were beginning to seem out of place. The symbols, once a declaration of power, now seemed like relics of a different time. Travis looked around, hoping to spot someone who would back him up, someone who would continue to carry the banner of his pride. But the more he looked, the more he saw people looking back at him with a steady gaze, and he could feel the power slip away, bit by bit. As they approached the next intersection, they came upon another group of Portlanders, all huddled near a street corner, engaged in quiet conversation. There was no shouting, no noise. But as the group marched past, one of the older men in the crew made a mistake. He turned toward them, his eyes flashing with hostility, and muttered something under his breath, something that wasn't meant to be heard, but it was. And as soon as the words left his mouth, the group of locals stopped what they were doing. Without saying a word, one by one, they began pulling out their phones, turning the lenses on the group. Travis's chest tightened. The air that had once felt thick with power now felt suffocating. What was once an atmosphere of pride and dominance was beginning to crack. These weren't just random citizens. These were people who had made it clear with their silence, with their eyes, that they weren't afraid. And they weren't going to let this group push them around. The group tried to keep their momentum, but it was harder now. The streets, which they had thought they owned, felt narrower, more claustrophobic. They had stepped into a hornet's nest, and they didn't know it yet. But every step they took was another step into a trap they had no way of getting out of. They tried to ignore it. They kept walking. They tried to escalate their actions, hoping the shock and awe would take hold. One of the men in the crew, growing bolder, grabbed a spray can from his pocket and began spraying random symbols across a nearby storefront window. The others cheered, egging him on, but the cheer felt empty. They didn't notice the way the crowd had grown. They didn't see the way eyes were now locked on them from every direction. And then there was a sound. A faint one at first, like a ripple across the crowd. One by one, people began to speak. They didn't shout, didn't raise their voices, but they spoke quietly to one another, to those around them. The murmur spread like wildfire, the quiet resolve growing louder. There was no us versus them. There was only Portland standing together, quietly resisting. And in that moment, Travis McDowell realized it. The city wasn't reacting to them the way they thought it would. Their show of force had backfired. This wasn't some meek city ready to bend. Portland had risen, not with a roar, but with a collective, unspoken response. Fear began to creep into Travis's chest. His crew didn't notice it yet. They were too busy escalating, too busy making their last stand. But Travis could feel it, the uncertainty gnawing at him, growing with every step. The more he tried to force their dominance, the more it slipped from his grasp. The silence was no longer comforting. It wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the storm itself. The sun hung low in the sky as the group made their way further into Portland's heart. The sound of their boots echoed across the streets, the harsh clang of their flags whipping. In the air, they were still trying to project confidence, their voices growing louder with each step. But with each corner they turned, with each block they passed, the uneasy feeling in Travis's chest grew. The city's energy had shifted. It was no longer indifferent to them. It was watching. The atmosphere was thick with the silence of the people who stood still, observing, waiting. Travis's crew continued to chant, shouting slogans that now felt increasingly hollow as the tension in the air grew heavier. They had made it all the way to a busy intersection near one of Portland's most iconic parks, a place that had long been known for peaceful gatherings and family events. But there was something different in the crowd that day. At first, it was just a few people standing at the edge, some on their phones, others simply staring. They weren't fighting back. They weren't screaming insults or hurling words of protest. They were simply watching, eyes locked on the group, faces neutral, calm, almost like they were waiting for something to happen. Travis waved his flag higher, trying to get their attention, hoping that the symbols of power and dominance would draw the response he was looking for. But it didn't come. Instead, the crowd just stood, their expressions unreadable. The silence was louder than any chant could have been. "They're not doing anything," one of the men said in frustration, glancing around nervously. His words echoed through the group, breaking the uneasy stillness that had settled over them. "That's the point," Travis said, his voice tight with tension. He was trying to maintain his composure, trying to convince himself that they were still in control. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The power they had expected to wield was slipping from their grasp, and they were no longer the center of attention. The group pressed forward, more agitated now. Their chants grew louder, but their eyes kept flicking to the sides, searching for any sign of opposition. And that's when it happened. At the far side of the park, a man stepped forward. He was older, his face weathered with age, his hair thinning under a simple beanie. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. As he approached, the crowd around him shifted, quietly parting to make way for him. It was as if he carried an invisible weight with him, a quiet authority that demanded attention. His footsteps were slow and deliberate as he made his way to the center of the street. The group stopped in their tracks, their chanting faltering for the briefest of moments. The man wasn't alone. Behind him, a few more individuals appeared, and then a few more. The small group quickly grew, not in volume, but in presence. They didn't need to yell. They didn't need to make noise. Their calm, quiet determination was a stark contrast to the group of men who had barged into the city with every intention of creating chaos. Travis and his crew stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The man at the front of the group finally spoke, his voice steady and clear. "You think you can come into our city," he said, his gaze steady as it met Travis's, "and make it yours? You think you can erase our history and our people with your hate?" Travis bristled, but there was something in the man's voice that made him hesitate. It wasn't anger or fear in his tone. It was calmness, a quiet confidence that seemed to deflate Travis's bravado with each word. "We didn't come here to make anything ours," Travis muttered, his eyes shifting to the crowd of people who had gathered behind the man. "We're just here to take back what's ours. Take it back?" The man stepped forward, his expression never changing. "This isn't your city. It never was. And you're about to find out exactly what happens when you bring hate into a place that was built on love and unity." The words hit harder than any of the protests or chants Travis had expected. It was as if the entire park had become a battlefield in that moment, the lines clearly drawn. But there was something about the calm that surrounded the community members that rattled Travis. They weren't screaming. They weren't inciting chaos. They were simply standing their ground out, and that was the moment when Travis realized he had miscalculated. He hadn't expected a quiet resistance. He hadn't expected people to stand against them without words or violence, without trying to physically throw them out of the city. But here they were calm, unwavering, and resolute. And in that silence, the group's power began to feel like an illusion. The more the community members stood there, the more Travis could feel his confidence drain away, replaced by a creeping unease. The group of Portlanders began to move, but they didn't rush. They didn't pounce. They simply began to surround. The men, gently, slowly. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't hostile. It was calculated, deliberate a message, made clear without uttering a single word. One of Travis's men shifted uncomfortably, looking around at the crowd that was growing by the second. He muttered something under his breath. What's going on? Why are they just standing there? Travis tried to maintain his posture, his chest still puffed out in an effort to look confident. But the uncertainty had crept into his voice. Don't worry. They'll move. They're just scared. But deep down, he knew they weren't scared. They were something else. And that was when the first video came through. Travis's phone buzzed in his pocket. The notification pinged softly, but it felt like the loudest sound he'd ever heard. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled it out and unlocked the screen. It wasn't just one video. It was a flood of footage of the group, from different angles, different perspectives, from different parts of the city. The phones that had once been aimed at them in mockery were now being turned into tools of resistance. The camera lens didn't lie. It captured their every move, every hateful word, every flag they raised, every spray of paint that had defaced Portland's sacred symbols. The videos weren't just about the group's destruction. They were about their exposure. And as the videos spread, the group's sense of dominance began to fade. Travis looked around, his hand tightening around his phone, but there was no escaping the reality of it. The videos weren't just being shared. They were being posted by locals. They were being passed around the city like wildfire, each view, adding weight to the community's message. And soon, those same videos weren't just viral locally. They were global. Everyone, from nearby cities to other countries, had started watching the group unravel. The crowd around them didn't grow loud. They didn't shout. They simply observed. Their silence was suffocating. The faces in the crowd weren't angry. They weren't even disgusted. They were determined. The Portlanders had found their way to stand tall without a single raised fist. They didn't need to yell back. They didn't need to curse or threaten. They just stood there, and in doing so, they took the wind out of the group's sails. Travis's grip tightened around his phone, his fingers trembling now, but still, he refused to back down. This isn't over, he muttered, trying to maintain the remnants of his pride. But his words didn't sound convincing, even to himself. The group's confident chants had faded, their words now drowned out by the quiet power that Portland was wielding. And then the community spoke again, this time not with their eyes, but with action. A figure emerged from the back of the crowd, moving deliberately toward them. He wasn't one of the loud protesters or the angry voices that usually rose up. He was calm, measured, and as he approached, he turned to Travis and his crew. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I don't need to yell at you," the man said, his voice steady and unwavering. "You've already lost." Crowd shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just a few people standing in the background. It was the entire city. Portland wasn't just resisting, they were rising. Slowly, steadily, but undeniably. The group had underestimated what they were walking into. As the silence deepened, and the videos spread like wildfire, Travis McDowell could feel the walls closing in. His crew began to shift nervously. They had thought this was their moment. This was their chance to make a mark. But what they had walked into wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. And they were not prepared for the way the city would handle them. The air around the group had shifted. What had begun as a loud, confident march through Portland's streets now felt like a heavy weight pressing down on their shoulders. Travis McDowell could feel it, his own confidence draining with each passing second. His crew, once loud and boisterous, had quieted, their eyes darting nervously at the faces surrounding them. The steady gaze of Portland's citizens was beginning to feel like a tightening noose. In the midst of this unnerving silence, the first video hit. It wasn't one of their own recordings. It was a video taken by one of the bystanders, someone in the crowd, a passerby who had pulled out their phone and begun filming the group's every move. And suddenly, the group wasn't in control of their own story anymore. Travis fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he unlocked the screen. It buzzed, notifications lighting up the screen one after another. Videos, comments, shares. It was all happening too fast for him to keep up. Is this for real? Someone from his crew muttered, looking over his shoulder. What the hell is going on? Travis's stomach churned as the video began to load. There he was, his face, his words, all of it on display for the entire world to see. At first, the footage was like any other they had recorded, loud and defiant. The group chanting their slogans, waving flags, acting out their arrogant postures. But the clip didn't stay on that for long. It quickly cut to something else, Dot. A clip of Travis stumbling on his words, caught off guard by the growing crowd. A flash of confusion in his eyes, a panicked movement. Then the phone camera zoomed in on his face, and the video shifted again. His bravado, his confident facade, was being pieced apart little by little. The camera had caught it all, the crew starting to look uncomfortable, the eyes darting around, the realization creeping in that the power they had hoped to wield was slipping away. Dot as the video continued. A sequence of cuts began to play. Their speeches, their displays of power, were now juxtaposed with their panicked, almost desperate reactions. The shots were raw, unfiltered, showing their true feelings behind the bravado. The air of superiority had faded, replaced by an undeniable sense of uncertainty. Dot. It wasn't just a video, it was a public dissection. They had been exposed, their arrogance stripped away, and the world was watching. What had been an attempt to make a statement now turned into a spectacle of weakness. Travis's fingers trembled as he watched the footage loop. The comments came in fast, faster than he could keep up with. At first, it was just a few mocking comments, jokes at their expense. But as the video spread, more and more comments flooded in. Some were harsh, others venomous. Some just mocked them, turning their pride into ridicule. And it was spreading everywhere on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and local news sites. Within minutes, their presence on the streets had transformed into a viral event. "Look at these clowns," one comment read. "Thought they were the real kings of the streets. Now they're nothing but a joke." Another comment followed. "Who else is enjoying watching these cowards crumble?" There were dozens of others, thousands. Comments, memes, videos. The group had gone from marching down Portland's streets, thinking they were powerful, to the laughingstock of the entire city. The people they thought were afraid of them were now tearing them apart, piece by piece, using the very tools they had come to depend on for their own dominance, social media. And then came the punchline, a meme. That had been shared across platforms. A picture of Travis, eyes wide with uncertainty, his mouth half open in mid-sentence. The text beneath it read, "Brought a flag, got a funeral." Travis's chest tightened. His phone felt heavier in his hand, and the comments kept rolling. The group had become the subject of ridicule. There was no escaping it now. Their sense of power was gone, replaced by an overwhelming wave of humiliation that seemed to drown them all at once. "They're laughing at us," one of the men from his crew muttered, glancing nervously at the screen. A laughter in his voice was forced. "They think we're just a joke." "Don't listen to them," Travis snapped, his voice unsteady. "It's just a few people. It'll die down." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. The video had gone viral. It wasn't just a few people anymore. It was the entire city, the entire world watching them fall. And what was worse, they had lost control of their own narrative. They had walked into Portland thinking they could take over, but now the city had taken their story and rewritten it, making them the villains, the ones who were exposed for what they truly were. Their faces were now plastered everywhere on social media, on news outlets, on memes that made their so-called cause look pathetic. They had come to make a statement, but now they were the punchline. And the worst part was that they couldn't fight back. They couldn't undo what had already been done. "We need to leave now," one of the men said, his voice shaking. He looked around, his eyes darting, scanning the crowd. They weren't shouting at them. They weren't throwing things. They were just watching. Quietly, calmly, the crew's bravado had cracked. Travis could see it in their eyes. Some of them were looking around for an escape route, as if they could just slip away and pretend nothing had happened. But there was nowhere to go. The city had absorbed them, had recorded them, and now it was too late. Their escape route had vanished the moment the videos started spreading. Travis tried to hold on to the little power he had left, but it slipped through his fingers like sand. He didn't know how to reverse this. He didn't know how to make it stop. There was no way to fight back. Not with flags. Not with words. Not with violence. They were powerless now. "We've been set up," one of the men whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked around nervously. This. This wasn't just a protest. This was something else. Travis's head spun. His mouth went dry. He couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. His hands were shaking as he scrolled through the feed, watching the destruction of his own pride. What had started as a calculated mission to reclaim the streets had ended with him exposed, broken, and humiliated in front of the entire world. He could hear the laughter in the distance. It wasn't the laughter of victory. It wasn't the loud, defiant laughter of someone in control. It was the kind of laughter that came from knowing you had already lost, that everything you had fought for had crumbled. It was the laughter of Portland, and it was the last thing Travis wanted to hear. In the distance, he saw the community gathering again, but this time they weren't just standing idly by. They were moving, calmly, methodically. They weren't angry. They weren't trying to fight. They were simply standing their ground, holding their phones up, capturing the moment for the entire world to see. And Travis realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that they had won. His phone buzzed again, and he looked down at the screen. The latest viral post had just come through. It was a short video, just a clip of their march, the group looking defiant, proud, confident. But then the video cut to a shot of Travis, standing still, his expression changing from arrogance to confusion as the realization hit him. The text on the post read, "Don't bring your hate to a place where love lives. Portland doesn't forget." The video had already amassed hundreds of thousands of views. Comments flooded in. Who's laughing now? Pride goes before a fall. Thanks for the show. See you on the internet. Travis dropped his phone to the pavement. His fingers trembled as he stared at the cracked screen, unable to look away from the pile of humiliation he had become. The world was watching, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The crowd around him didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They simply stood. They were silent, their eyes fixed on him, and in that silence, Travis McDowell realized the truth. They had already lost. Travis's eyes followed the ground as he stepped, each footfall heavier than the last. His crew, once brimming with pride, now shuffled behind him, their heads down, their confidence shattered. They had come to Portland, thinking they could plant their flag, make a statement. But what had started as a confident march had devolved into a retreat, a crumbling of everything they believed they were. They moved slowly, hesitantly, as the eyes of the city Portland's heart followed them. There were no cheers, no chants. Just a deep silence that enveloped the group, leaving them exposed and weak. They had underestimated Portland. They had underestimated its people. And now they were paying the price. In the distance, the vans were still parked along the curb, but there was no sign of the once gloating group they had been just hours ago. The men walked without purpose now, aimless, as if the ground beneath. Their feet had lost its hold on them. As they moved, the crowd dispersed quietly, their eyes still locked on the retreating figures, not with anger, but with a steady, unflinching gaze that spoke volumes. There was no need to confront them anymore. The victory had been won without a single raised fist, without a single shouted word. It was a victory that didn't need to be loud. It was a victory that spoke in the quiet, calculated movements of Portland's community. And as the group retreated into the distance, something shifted. A quiet murmur that had followed them earlier began to grow. People pulled out their phones again, not to record them, but to share what had just happened. Videos, photos, snippets of their retreat clips, of their exposed weakness, began to circulate. The community had documented everything, from the moment the group entered the city to the time they finally retreated. The footage wasn't just about their humiliation. It was a story. A story of Portland and of the people who called it home. A story of unity, resilience, and the quiet power of a community that refused to be broken. The video of the group's downfall hit social media like wildfire. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. The footage, once meant to glorify their defiance, was now a tool of exposure. People had witnessed it all: the arrogance, the hate, the desecration of sacred symbols, and the retreat. But most importantly, they saw what happened next. The city's response. As the video spread, it was met with a wave of reactions. Comments flooded in from all over, not just from Portland, but from across the country and even abroad. People watched in awe as Portlanders, united in their calm and strategic response, turned the group's march into a spectacle of shame. One video showed Travis, his head low, his eyes darting nervously as he fumbled with his phone, trying desperately to salvage anything to regain control. The caption read, "Brought a flag. Got a funeral." It spread like wildfire. Another video cut between the group's swaggering arrival and their retreat, juxtaposing their loud proclamations of power with the quiet, determined gaze of the people of Portland. The message was clear. You came here to divide. You leave exposed. In less than an hour, the video had gone viral. The hashtags began to gain traction. Hashtag Portland stands together. Hashtag hate has no home here. Hashtag unity in silence. The views kept climbing, and with them, a sense of collective pride. Within the city, Portland had stood strong, and the message had been delivered loud and clear. As the group slunk off into the distance, their once defiant flags now limp in the wind, there was a palpable sense of victory among the community. It wasn't the victory of a battle fought with fists or guns. No, this was a victory of something much deeper, the power of unity and strategy. The people of Portland had shown that the most powerful form of resistance didn't come from aggression, but from the ability to stand your ground and remain calm in the face of hatred. Strategy over spectacle. Quiet strength over loud hate. Back in the heart of the city, as the group retreated, a new wave of people began to emerge, quietly organizing, checking in with one another, making sure the message was spread far and wide. The community didn't stop. The resistance didn't stop. It simply kept moving like a well-oiled machine, turning the city's collective response into a force that would be felt long after the group had left. But it wasn't just about defeating hate. It was about creating change, about ensuring that the group's presence wasn't just met with resistance, but with unity. And as the video of their fall continued to spread, Portland's message rang loud and clear. Hate had no place here. As the viral footage reached its peak, news stations began to pick it up. At first, the local media shared the video in disbelief, unsure of what to make of it. But soon, the national news outlets followed. They wanted answers. How had Portland, a city so often associated with peace and progressivism, managed to neutralize such a large, vocal group of extremists without a single violent confrontation? The interviews began. Local reporters spoke to Portland residents, many of whom were involved in the quiet resistance. Some were shocked by the group's actions. Others were proud of how their community responded. The interviews were filled with the same themes: unity, strategy, and a deep pride in their city's ability to reject hate. By the time the day had passed, the group was no longer just a group of loud men with flags. They were a lesson in how a community could fight back without fists, how a city could face hatred and send it packing with nothing but calculated resistance and silent power. As the sun set over Portland, the streets began to fill with people again. The food trucks reopened, the music played louder, and the laughter returned. But this time, there was something different in the air. A collective pride, a feeling of accomplishment, and a message that would linger long after the last flag had been taken down. The group, once so proud, had left with nothing. The city of Portland had erased their presence in the most effective way possible, by exposing them, showing the world who they really were, and reclaiming their streets. It wasn't about winning a fight. It wasn't about victory in the traditional sense. It was about sending a message. And Portland had sent it loud and clear. As the evening drew to a close, the video of the group's downfall continued to spread. People watched, shared, and commented. And with each share, Portland's message became stronger. This city doesn't just fight back. It fights smart. And now, the world knew it. By the time the group had disappeared into the distance, their retreat was all but confirmed. Their flags, once held high with so much defiance, were now limp in the wind as the group slunk away, defeated and broken. The streets of Portland had quieted, but there was no celebration. There was no need. The message had already been sent. Portland had done what it does best: stand tall, united, and resilient in the face of hate. As the group's humiliating defeat spread across the city, Portland's next step was simple yet deliberate: make sure the world saw exactly what had happened, and that the story would never be forgotten. The video had already been circulating for hours, but the final version was about to go live. The footage wasn't just a document of the events. It was a message. A message from the heart of Portland to the world. A message that said, hate doesn't belong here. The video started with the now familiar images of Travis McDowell and his crew marching through the streets. They were loud, they were proud, and they thought they were invincible. But then the video cut to the quiet, organized resistance, the calm faces of the people who had stood their ground. The moment when the group's arrogance began to crack, the uncomfortable silence that had surrounded them, the viral moments of their own confusion, panic, and retreat. And then the community's final, quiet victory, showing them exactly what it meant to step into a city like Portland. At the end of the video, a single phrase appeared on the screen: "This is Portland. We bury hate in the pavement." The words hung there for a moment, stark and powerful, before the video cut to black. There was no need for anything more. The community's message had been clear from the start, and now it was being delivered to the world without a hint of hesitation. The hate the group had brought was obliterated, not through violence or aggression, but through unity and strength. The final version of the video went live, and almost immediately it exploded across the internet. The group's arrogance and hate, once broadcasted on their own terms, were now being shown for what they really were: weak, cowardly, and entirely out of place in a city like Portland. Within hours, the video had gone viral. The hashtag We Bury Hate was trending worldwide. Comments flooded in from every corner of the globe, some expressing disbelief at what they had just witnessed, while others praised Portland for the way it had handled the situation. But the overwhelming sentiment was pride, not just in the way the city had responded, but in the fact that it had sent a message to anyone who would dare try to do the same. One meme quickly circulated, featuring a still from the video of Travis McDowell, his face a mixture of confusion and defeat. The text on the meme read, "Brought hate, got exposed, Portland don't play." The group's faces, once so proud and filled with bravado, had now become internet fodder, mocked and ridiculed. Their words, their symbols, everything they stood for, was reduced to nothing but a joke. What they had hoped to use as a weapon had been turned against them, and they were now the subject of every sarcastic meme, every joke that people could muster. The internet did what it does best: it magnified their shame, and the world was watching. But as the video gained momentum, Portland's work didn't stop at the digital world. No, the community knew that there was more to be done. The fight was never going to be just about making a viral video. The video was a message. Sure, but the real work would continue offline, in the streets, in the neighborhoods, in the hearts of the people who made Portland what it was. Behind the scenes, community leaders were already organizing the next steps. They weren't done yet. The video might have gone viral, but now the city had to ensure that the group's actions would be felt far beyond the internet. The local press was already picking up the story, but it wasn't just the media pushing. The message was the people. Portland's voices were now unified, clear, and loud. In the weeks that followed, the video became part of the local curriculum shown in schools, played in community centers, and used in discussions about resistance, unity, and how a city can come together to protect its values. The community didn't need to shout. They didn't need to wave flags. They didn't need to burn anything down. They simply stood their ground, stood together, and let the world see what they were made of. The community continued to organize peaceful events, marches that were not in retaliation, but in celebration of their values. The group's actions had sparked something in the city that couldn't be erased, an even deeper commitment to unity. inclusivity, and justice. Portland had made it clear. Hate had no place here, and neither would those who tried to bring it. As for the group who had come to tear apart the city, their plans had been shattered. They had thought they would walk into Portland and demand it bow to their will. But what they didn't understand was that this city had a backbone made of something much stronger than anger. Portland didn't need to fight back with force. It fought with unity. It fought with resilience. It fought with a quiet power that the group had underestimated from the beginning. Their final act of hate, their failed attempt to divide, would be remembered, but not as a victory. It would be remembered as a moment when the city came together and rejected them completely. It would be remembered as the day Portland stood tall, not with fists clenched, but with hearts open and eyes clear. And in that final moment, as the video continued to spread, the community knew that their message had been sent and amplified, louder than ever. The streets had spoken. The people had spoken. And the world had heard. Asterisk.